Olá, sejam bem-vindos, todas e todos.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this event talking business about data science and artificial intelligence. It's a pleasure to be here with you today for this first event this year. I'd like to welcome three speakers here today that know a lot about this topic. I'm going to be very brief, and I'm going to introduce the three of them together. My name is Jason Diet. I'm the Vice President of Uninter Global Hub, and our mission is to take more of Uninter to the world and bring more of the world to Uninter. You have simultaneous translation, so you can watch it in both English and Portuguese. You're going to speak both languages throughout the event. The first block is going to be in English, and then you're going to change into Portuguese. And then you're going to have a Q&A session at the end, and these questions are going to be coming from our audience, so it's going to be both in English and Portuguese. So you can feel free to send us our questions throughout the conversation. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can at the end. You don't need to write us more than once. We are going to try to answer all of them or as much as we can at the end of the second block. I'm going to talk for 2 more minutes, and then we're going to have the first round of conversation. We're going to ask a few questions one-on-one, and then we're going to go to our round table. So briefly, our three speakers are experts in AI and data science. The goal, our goals today is to help to demystify some of the topics of the terms used in these areas, but it's more to demystify it than to have a deep knowledge on all that. So we are going to talk briefly about AI and science data and machine learning, know how companies are working on these areas and how new technologies are and are to continue to impact your activities. So I'm going to have Sean Lawrence, who's going to speak in English, Carmen Dominguez, who's Brazilian and live in the U.S., and Guilherme Patriota, professor at the Uninter Polytechnic School.
I'm delighted to start our conversation with Sean. Sean, instead of me trying to summarize your very interesting experience, I'd love to make my first question just a self-introduction. If you could tell people a little bit about yourself and about your professional work, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. Nice to meet everybody. Thanks for having me here. My name is Sean Lorenz. My background, I have my PhD is in computational neuroscience. And ever since then, I've worked primarily in startups, especially in the Internet of Things, digital health, and robotics, as well as 3D printing. And in each of these, they're mostly had something to do with artificial intelligence. So I've been on the product management side, really trying to understand how you can use AI in practical, real-world senses to solve problems for customers. So that's essentially what I do.
Fantastic. And I believe you prepared just a couple of brief slides. We normally don't do this and spend time with slides and material, but because the terminology sometimes get confused, we thought it would be interesting to share. So feel free to use your screen share in any of these parts. But my first question is just, what is data science? What is artificial intelligence? If you could spend a couple of minutes just trying to get everybody onto the same page, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I will do my best. I think it's important to first say that getting everyone on the same page is difficult with these terms. A lot of people have very different interpretations of what each of these are. So, even on the panel, there might be differences. But I will at least try to explain from, my perspective what each of these different categories are. So the first one being artificial intelligence. This is a very big category. You hear it all over the place now. And really, artificial intelligence has been around for a long, long time. And it has been mostly applied to, the 1950s and 60s, more rules-based, robotic systems and manufacturing floors, where they called it artificial intelligence. But it's not the kind of AI that we hear about today. Has a very different interpretation in terms of not really learning using algorithms. It's been a lot of rules and learning how to do things over time. However, today, artificial intelligence has become an umbrella term for pretty much anything that is machine learning or deep learning. And so what do we mean by machine learning? That is essentially this idea that you can use something called artificial neural networks, but also there's a lot of different kinds of machine learning algorithms that essentially learn without being explicitly programmed. So what that means is you can take a lot of data and give it some labels, meaning I know this is a cat, I know this is a dog, and you throw it into this algorithm and it learns on what is called a training set, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And essentially it spits out something that predicts that's a cat or a dog. Now, deep learning is kind of a more recent term that is a subset of machine learning. And all that means is it takes that same principle of neural networks and it just adds in the deep part, which is, more layers, right? So they have more layers in between the input and the output to essentially learn, where you don't necessarily understand all the features, the things that go into it. And sometimes it's more of what's called a black box, right? It's hard to understand sometimes how it got to that answer. And it requires typically a lot more data. And that's why it's become more popular, is with faster computing and more access to data. Deep learning has become feasible to create all the different kind of GPT-4 models you see and all this other kind of stuff that's happening in data science, in this world of AI. And then lastly, data science is really, how I see it is, it's kind of a term for understanding people who manage data. And that could be anything from data processing, data, there's data ops, there's all these DevOps there's a whole slew of people that are essentially doing more business intelligence to machine learning, as well as, making sure you can process millions of, pieces of data in a second, right? All that is part of data science. So it's the whole ecosystem around making sure that you can actually say, I recommend this sweater for you, right? All that is encompassed within data science.
Great.
So I hope that makes sense.
Yes, that's definitely that's helpful. I can give you another question. I see you have more, some more content here. One of my questions is just, how data science and AI are distinct from each other. You brought up that people have different definitions. So that would be interesting to hear from other panelists as we go forward. And also one question that I had, which I don't know where it would fit in here, is data science I often think of in terms of just huge data sets and artificial intelligence with very large companies. You have leaders out there, Amazon, Google, Meta, other things that you've mentioned. You work with 0 to 1 companies, so with startup companies, and I'm just curious, how do these, what are some of the differences between the terms, and then what are some of the differences in how these technologies are used in different size companies?
Right. So I'll just leave this up for a second just to point out that, when you're a startup, you don't have access to a lot of data. And so in order to get around that, you get smart about how you use what you've got. So there are different techniques to get around that. Things like semi-supervised learning, where it's really good at learning from small data sets and trying to iterate over time. Same thing like reinforcement learning. So it depends on the tool that you have in your toolkit and what are you trying to solve, right? So in the case of reinforcement learning, you need a robot to learn how to navigate a space better. You give it reinforcement learning, which means it has a reward to get from point A to point B, and you teach it over time to get better. So the reinforcement learning algorithm just learns, whereas like supervised learning, for example, is really good at saying, I know I have all this data that has labels, cat, dog, like I was mentioning, and I want it to spit out something that tells me that. So like depending on your situation, you can use in different ways. So for example, in startups, one way to get around that is to actually understand, how you can get access to data by partnerships. Oftentimes what will happen is you find access to data through, let's say in healthcare, you work with a larger institution like the Mayo Clinic or someone like this that may have access to that data. And so you create these strategic partnerships to say, I would love to see, how we can work together so that I can run this algorithm. I have this great idea. What can we do to get that information, get that data set, right? There's also a lot of really great open source data sets now that didn't exist 5 years ago. So the access to data is getting better and better. The other one is just to create a great product, collect data on it, and then, run on it as you can. So there's a lot of different options.
Great. And just a last question, because, we're running through things quickly, and I want to alert the audience to your knowledge in the health sector. So that's obviously a huge part of the economy. It's almost 20% of GDP in the U.S., $4 trillion economy, huge in countries obviously across the world. I'm just curious how data science and AI are impacting the healthcare sector and how they're used by, small and large companies in that industry.
So this is, my focus, and there's so many exciting things happening. I'm working currently, actually, most recently was with a company called Linus Health, that we were using AI to predict neuropsych assessment using iPads. So we are able to predict dementia better than an amyloid plaque blood test, right? So you can go and do a 1-minute clock test on an iPad, and we can use all that data with speech to say you're a high probability for possible mild cognitive impairment or dementia. Lusum Health is another really interesting company that is working with, there are hundreds of these little point solutions in artificial intelligence where, they might be predicting colorectal cancer, or they might be predicting breast cancer or diabetes, the pre-diabetic patients. And so what they do is this company looks at all those point solutions and says, how can we integrate that into the actual workflows of radiologists, oncologists, and different, PCPs, right? And so that is really happening fast now. Is there's hundreds of AI algorithms out there that don't have access to the data. So what they're doing is they're partnering with these larger organizations to pipe into, the different workflows that already exist instead of building new tools, right? So that the EHR data is directly connected to the solution, and that companies like Lusum act as that middle platform to stitch together data with AI solutions. And so you'll start seeing in the next several years a lot more in the healthcare world where you go to a doctor and it'll say, you got your colonoscopy and you have a X% chance of developing, colorectal, lower GI cancers. So it's really exciting, and I think healthcare is the biggest win for AI currently.
Great. Thanks so much, Sean. I really appreciate it, and we will have you back on the roundtable shortly. Agora eu vou trocar para português, e grande prazer.
Now I'm going to switch to Portuguese, and I'd like to welcome Carlos Domingues. She's an expert. I was talking to her before. I'm not going to introduce our speakers. I think it's more interesting for them to tell us about their background, about their knowledge. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself, personally and professionally? Yes, thank you all. Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I apologize. I'm a bit chaotic now. Moving, so I'm running out of time. So I apologize for my chaos. I usually am less chaotic, but so I'm Brazilian, as you can see, but I spent most of my life in the U.S. I moved when I was a teenager. I lived there for 21 years. I'm in Brazil, but I'm going back to the U.S., so I can say that I'm already in the U.S. So I did my high school in the U.S., and what will be in Brazil our high school. And then I studied applied math in Harvard, and I worked, so I can talk about that later. And then I did my master's in data science at Columbia University. So I was part of the first class of data science in Columbia, at the University of Columbia in New York. So I started when I thought I was gonna study engineering. Then I changed into math. I started my career with an internship at Goldman Sachs, investment banking, first in technology, then trading desk. I was at the trading desk in 2008 when we had the housing crisis, the bubble, the semi-prime, the subprime, and so it was a very interesting time to be working at the trading desk. Then I went back to school. In the U.S. is different than Brazil, so you do the internship during the summer when you're not studying. Then you go back and you carry on with your studies. When I graduated, I decided to go to the World Bank instead of having a career in the private sector. Of course, it was still related to the financial sectors. Then I worked with projects. Then I did a career change. I started working in a startup. I decided to travel the world on my own. It was some sort of a sabbatical. Then I went back to New York, to live in New York. Before I was working, I was living in DC. Then I started working for startups, and little by little I was pulled into data science. I'm someone who works with data, math, and business.
Abrangente, né? Tanto para negócios,
broadly speaking, in the private sector, but also NGO and so on and so forth. I'd like to take the opportunity to ask you about a term that we talk a lot, which is algorithms. You studied it, so basic question. No, it's not everybody who understands what is an algorithm. Could you give us an example? What is an algorithm? It's a good start. I got closer to data science. I started working with algorithms. I learned how to program in Python, and I started developing machine learning algorithms. I decided that I needed more theory. So when I did my master's, I started working in management consulting, working on a more technical part, product development and data science. And I then developed my own consulting company, and today I'm an independent consultant for this area. I work with AI, data analysis, data science, and yeah, it's very diverse what I do. So recently, during the pandemic, I realized that there was a lack of understanding, as Jason just said, about concepts that people are talking about, but sometimes very superficially, and people don't really understand what these terms really mean. So it's not a criticism. It's not part of their world. So I started a project to try to share my knowledge and try to clarify some of these technication, and not only what's an algorithm, what's data science, but basically what it has to do to all of us, not only us who work in technology, but us who live in a society, who use apps, who live in a society, people are collecting our data being used, and so on. So let's start with an algorithm. What's an algorithm? I have a video. You can follow me. It's Carmen Dom on YouTube and on Instagram if you want to follow me. But what's an algorithm? Basically, it's a series of instructions to have something done. We don't think about it, but we develop algorithms in our daily life every time. So regardless whether we are using something technological, okay, like baking a cake. So I have the recipe, and we have the ingredients. I mix this with that, and then I will bake it for a certain amount of minutes, then I put it in the oven, and then you have the outcome. You have a cake. So you followed an algorithm. You got the ingredients. Those are the inputs of an algorithm. You applied a logic sequence of instruction, and you generated a final product, a cake, a pie, a pizza, and it's the final product, which is the algorithm output. So what happens with the computing programming? You have a language, so it's a language that the computer understands. So if you say that in Portuguese, like get the flour and the eggs, I mean, the computer is not going to understand. So we need the computer to understand the words I'm saying, and the computer is going to translate into a code, and it's going to generate an output. What does that mean? So what is everybody saying? So the Instagram algorithm is doing this and that or the other. No, it's not that the algorithm is doing all that on its own. It doesn't. The algorithm does that according to an instruction given by a human being. So if I want to create a bias in the process, I will code, or I will program the algorithm to do it that way. And sometimes this bias happens unintentionally. Okay, but just to give you an idea. So our colleague just said that the processing power has increased a lot since the beginning of AI. So now we have AI algorithms that are more powerful. They can process a larger amount of data, and that's the big data that we were talking about. And we can apply machine learning models which is a form of artificial intelligence to process all this data and generate consequences, which could be like identify objects in a picture like a dog or a cat, or reinforcement learning that is used in a GPT chat, or if you're going to create another model using another machine learning model, one of them, I mean, we've talked about neural networks, deep learning, but it's not only that, right? So those are algorithms that are being used more and more, but we can use them to do a bunch of things. For example, we can use an algorithm to help to speed up or select CVs for a job position. You can speed up the process. Somehow it can make the process more objective, or it can give us an illusion that we are creating a more objective process, but at the end of the day, we are going to translate an existing bias, conscious or unconscious bias, to the algorithm we are developing. So at the end, we can translate and perpetuate or emphasize patterns in the society that we don't want to be perpetuated, like racial discrimination, gender discrimination. There are some problems that you have to be aware. We have to be aware that they can happen. And the more we understand about the technology behind all of that, if you understand how algorithms work, how models are trained. Our colleague talked about training sets. What are the database that are training our models? What are the bias that our database has? So if we train our models using this database, we can perpetuate this bias. It's important for us to understand as a society. I think I talked too much. I don't know. It's perfect. I do have a quick question, which is, what is a general artificial intelligence, and what is a narrow artificial intelligence? When we talk about a general or broad artificial intelligence, we are thinking about an AI that is closer to a human being, like sci-fi, like a robot is interacting with a human being, and this robot is going to be one of us, and this robot will dominate the world. The idea behind it is that robots, computers basically, because a robot is nothing more than a computer. A computer is a series of algorithms, that they will reach the level of a human intelligence. But what's the most complex part of it? Because a human being has emotional intelligence, physical intelligence, body intelligence. I think according to a Harvard professor, there are like 8 types of intelligence. I have a video about that as well. So us human beings, we also have ethics, moral. These are things that a robot won't be able to have on its own, at least so far, and we are far away from having a robot able to do that. I mean, even if you get into this chat GPT, it may seem that you're talking to a person, but you're not. You're talking to an algorithm that was programmed to interpret a language model to understand your text, and then do some sort of research to see how it's gonna answer your question. So for it to get to a point, it's trained to say, okay, I don't know about this subject, Or if you ask the algorithm, the chat, the GTP to do something illegal, it's programmed to say it's not recommendable for you to do that because it's you programmed it to say that it's illegal. So you have the impression that you're talking to a robot. In English, we call it it's not sentient. It doesn't have emotional intelligence, which is very important for human beings. AI in general is far away from the artificial narrow intelligence is a concept that is among us. We think about narrow intelligence. Okay, it's the AI who can do something very well. For example, identify spam emails, identify objects in an image. Drive an autonomous car through, Google Maps to give you directions or how to get from A to B. So a series of things to do. Recommend you a song based on your history of songs listened throughout the year. No, I recommend you songs, new TV programs, TV series. So this is the narrow AI, and that's something that we have been developing. It's very well developed, and it's getting better by the hour. ChatGTP, as you may think that it's narrow, but it's not. It's ANI. It was programmed to read a text, interpret, answer based on program data. That is very relevant. This difference is very relevant. So remember that us, human beings, we have emotions, sentiments, feelings, morals that a robot doesn't have. I have so many questions here, and I see that our audience are adding more and more questions here. I'd like to come to the roundtable ASAP, so I'm gonna pass the floor to Professor Guilherme Patriota. I'm gonna ask him a few questions, and then I will go back to you. Welcome, Professor Guilherme. It's a pleasure to have you here. It's my pleasure. So, can you start introducing yourself very briefly, who you are, and your journey? Okay, I'm electric engineer. I worked in hospitals for many years, and I realized that artificial intelligence and data science has been present for a long time. I worked for more than 10 years in this area. Then I moved into education. I'm now a professor at Uninter in everything that has to do with IT, especially data science, big data, and so on. I have a master's degree in electrical engineering applied to AI, and I have an MBA in health management. And then I started working with 3D printers, just like Professor Lawrence mentioned. And now I left the city of Curitiba, and I've been living in Montreal, Canada, just like Professor Carmen. Now I have a question for you, and I see someone asking the same question here in our chat. Question is, what to study? With everything that's going on, so many fields of knowledge, what do you think? How can you focus your learning process. First, you need to decide whether you want to work with data science or AI. Do I have to choose? Not necessarily. You can, there's a great area called AI and data science is part of it. So the main focus, which is what language should I study? What is the model that I need to learn first? Basically, what's more important for data science and AI is math, statistics, and also know about different sectors. You're not going to apply AI just for the sake of it. Data science there to solve a problem. You're not going to do a TFDF model for nothing. You are always trying to solve a problem. So you have to know that you're going to apply all that to solve a problem. We'll guide you to what area you're going to go. So I'm going to work in hospitals. I'm going to work with management, general manager, sports. So you need to know a lot about this other side, the communication part. And finally, you're going to learn the technical part. Python, Rust, Go, R, all types of possible algorithms. But that changes. In a couple of years, another language is going to come to life. The tool will change. The pencil changed, but the painter is still there. So you as the painter, you as a professional need to be up to date, learning how to use the new brushes to do your paintings or your pencils to design something. So yeah, that's my tip. You mentioned that currently you live in Canada, right? I imagine that you moved recently, right? So what are the main professional and cultural differences that you saw so far between Brazil and Canada? And what would be your view in terms of career perspectives? Yeah. The greatest difference here here in Canada is that it's a country with which is a lot more developed in terms of data science and AI. Brazil has a lot of research in this area, but we have other areas that are being researched in Brazil. And again, technology in Canada has a higher demand. You have more companies in this area, and for this reason, salaries are higher, but again, cost of living is higher as well. So pros and cons. So if you're going to move, it's not something that you do from one day to the other. You have to think about it, because Brazilians like party, Brazilians like the heat, the warmth of people, the warmth of the country. So we have 4 or 5 months with snow here in Canada. So it's something that you have to think about. And the market, the labor market here is more focused in technology than in Brazil, especially AI and data science. But in Brazil, it's easier if you don't have experience to get into this market. Here, because of the culture, because during your training, if you don't have the practical knowledge, it's going to be more complicated for a Brazilian. So they have to do, Brazilians come to Canada and they have to do some sort of voluntary work. So you can show your knowledge and show your what you can do. So the market in Canada is larger and it pays like 10 times more than Brazil. So thank you so much. Now, we are going for our roundtables with questions from our audience. So I'm gonna use the language that was used for whoever asked the question, and you are open to answer in whatever language you prefer. First question is in English.
Gabriela participated in a program recently, so it's great to see you here. She asked, how can we develop critical thinking in students so that they can create and develop algorithms when they're not solving simple tasks, as these are being performed by AI, given the algorithms need correct programming to achieve the intended goal? So, question about critical thinking. How do we develop critical thinking in students? So, if for these responses, I'll do the following. Any of the panelists can sort of raise their hand and signal, and then I'll point it to them. Okay, so I had, first I had Professor Guilherme and then Carmen.
Ok. Bom, Gabriela, que bom que você está aqui com a gente de volta. Boa pergunta.
Well, Gabriela, thanks for being here with us. Critical thinking, we can only develop with practice. At least that's what we are trying to bring to our students in our data science classes. Basically, providing more opportunities for the student to be exposed to different situations. So you cannot have a critical thinking about a hospital problem if you've never experienced this problem. So it's important that you have this how to understand your problem, and it's part of your development. But from my point of view, there's no magic and there's no easy way to do it. You need to be exposed to every situation that you need to learn to have critical thinking.
So sorry, I was checking if I was on mute. I guess I'll pick up in English since the question was in English, but I agree with Guilherme. I would add that studying, and this is a sort of a follow-up to a point that Guilherme made, right, about what to study and so on. This might be surprising, but I actually think that studying the social sciences is quite helpful, because by studying things like philosophy, sociology, ethics, thinking about how we make our decisions, why we decide things the way we do, like neuroscience, right? More and more these days. It's such a growing field, right? And it brings so much information about why we think the way we think, why we make decisions the way we make them, what is right and what is wrong, right? More and more we're developing algorithms that have huge impacts on enormous amounts of people. And the more impact that we have, the more we have to think about what is that impact that we're having, right? Are we developing an algorithm that is just suggesting something that you should buy, is just an advertisement? Or what is that impact? What's the impact that can have? Is it just that person is going to spend more money or less money? Or is it we're going to target people for products that they can't afford, but we are enticing them to want to buy, right? Or are we targeting people at moments when they're vulnerable, and we're potentially sort of developing algorithms that can identify that and then present them with information that's going to potentially change or influence how they vote for in an election, who they vote for in an election, right? That can have impacts for democracy across the globe, right? We've seen many, many cases across the world in developed, countries in the developed world and countries in the underdeveloped world that have been impacted by this, right? Misinformation is rampant in our society. And the algorithms behind how these things spread are all very similar to algorithms to how can we suggest a book for this person to buy or a song for this person to listen to. So having that critical thinking, that's also going to come from thinking what are the ethical and moral values behind these things that we should apply to our day-to-day, to the algorithms that we're developing, and what is right and wrong. When it's usually, oftentimes it's not so clear cut, right? And so I think, things like philosophy, for example, can really help develop that critical thinking to make those decisions. Because even if you are a programmer, you're developing machine learning code in Python, you are at some point going to have to, think about these questions. And then, like Demi said, having the experience, even if not in the direct area that you're applying it to, but in other areas can also help. Right.
So the next, I'm going to put two questions together, and I'll start with Sean on this because I saw in our chat, internal chat, Sean, you answered to this, but the students can't see that. So Will Santos asked about programming in Python and if that is a good programming language and what platforms. So that's part one. And then there's another question that was brought up sort of around inequality and the use of artificial intelligence and newer technologies. So starting with the micro around the programming and Python, is that a good place technically to start? And then there's a question about if and as artificial intelligence is more broadly accessed by the population, what impacts might that have on inequalities?
Mm. Yeah, both really great.
Start with Sean, and then if others have things to add, please just raise your hand and we'll go to you after.
Yeah, I'm sure that everybody in the panel has opinions on this too, but just from my experience, Python has by far been the most useful tool in terms of especially the business, building out actual products that actually get used and deployed outside of research. Within research environments, I've used R and MATLAB, and they actually both have really great value in terms of trying to explore and be creative from a scientific point of view. Those tools are very good at analyzing data in very different ways. But I would say Python definitely. In terms of the last question, I thought that was really interesting. I think AI is already in everything we use. Like you mentioned the smartphones. Smartphones have so much AI in them. Your pictures are using Retinex algorithms from 1970. In everything you do, your speech, everything, all the analysis, the accelerometer is being used to predict Parkinson's in healthcare, to understand if they're shaking. All that is being used and applied already to the general population, right? And so I actually think there is a lot of ways that we all get to benefit from it. Obviously, there will be inequalities, but I do think in terms of how we all use it, it's already under the hood, and we don't even know it a lot of the time.
Great. Guilherme? Você está em mudo, Guilherme.
You're on mute. Okay, thank you. I totally agree with what Professor Shan said. There is the possibility of having some sort of inequality causing by AI, but I think it's more likely that we have better conclusions and better outcomes and better good things. So Python is the easy language, is the fast learning language. You can learn it very easily to apply algorithms. And what is important in AI is not the language itself, but the world is starting to move from Python to Go and Rust. Python is good for AI, but when you start going to larger models like GPT-3, GPT-4, and other AIs. Python is a little bit slow in terms of training the algorithm. What does that mean? Talking about millions of dollars. Why? Because you need to have machine servers connected, video equipment connected 24 hours a day for months, for years, just to train a certain AI. If your algorithm is restricted to a slower language, it will suffer. Of course, Python has ways of solving its problems, but C, C++ are faster. But they're more complex to learn and more complex to be applied as well in terms of AI. And then we have a language like Go, language created by Google. It's going to be fast, and it's similar, somehow similar to Python. It's been used by Google to create AI, and we have Rust running on the outside, which is a language to try to replace C and C++. Many languages tried to do so but couldn't, and Rust is trying. And it's having some kind of managing to do so. It's very, very fast, and with algorithms growing like crazy, AI with 120 billion variables, you need hard computing, heavy computing, and heavy algorithms. So in terms of AI causing increase the gap, social gap that we have, as I said, I think it's a tool. AI is a tool. It's a technology. And unfortunately, when we are applying a technological tool in societies that are not ready, we will increase the social gap that happened with computers, with the internet, with smartphones, and it's happening right now with AI. We're going to see huge progress in terms of learning, education, like for kids, like having a professor at home. A teacher is gonna be there, but they're gonna have someone to solve some questions. But they're not gonna see that in more vulnerable and poor communities. There is a risk of this increase in social gap. I will add in terms of inequality. In a country as unequal as ours, I mean, what's the role of AI? Is it going to increase this difference? And I think that it depends. For some situations, it's going to increase. For others, no. Why? If you think that you can have access to a lot of information, internet computing, we can learn a lot on our own today. With YouTube, for example, like videos that can explain you a concept. I've been doing this, you have other people doing this, we have access to newspapers, and that can help you, even if it's coming from someone with a different background. I mean, maybe people who didn't have access to a very good school, but they can try to compensate this gap through the information they can reach and they can find on their own, so they can be, they can be self-learners. So on the other hand, I could see during the pandemic, people who didn't have access to good internet providers, to a good computer, and they stayed behind. So we broadened the gap. So other people could keep their studies during the pandemic. So you can think that, okay, now you're talking about metaverse, we're talking about GPT chat, we're talking about all these technologies that are changing really fast, and they require more expensive tools. So to connect to metaverse, you need the goggles, and they're not cheap. So if you need to get into metaverse to take a class so you can be trained to do your job, if you don't have access to the goggles, you're going to stay behind. So if you can have this minimum entry point, we can at least try to get closer to your colleagues who have the access. That's from an individual point of view, someone who is trying to learn to have a better job, make more money, and reduce inequalities through this. We have another bias, which is how some companies, I can say that a small amount of companies who manage, who have access to data coming from millions of people, companies who process this data to sell products to these people and be profitable, make money out of it. So these people are having access to more data, more processing ability, more advanced algorithms. So we hope that they can generate more profit. That's why companies are trying to get more and more data from us. That means profit to them. From my point of view as a data scientist, I think that I can generate more interesting insight about people. What do I want? I want more data about these people, because more data I have, more correlations I can do, more insights I can generate about someone, more interesting thing I can find out about someone to sell a product, or I don't know, depending on what you're going to do to provide the service to help the government to provide a service to a community, for example. From this point of view, that's great. Like, get the government to use more AI ethically, of course, to close gaps. So it depends on how it's going to be used. Again, the more we understand, the more we can make the right decisions as a society. We have only a small amount of people who has the knowledge of how to develop and operate and operationalize this algorithm and models. Larger is going to be the difference. More people are more knowledgeable of what is going on. More people can participate in this process, even if you're not programmed, but if you can participate as a population, asking for a regulation to say, okay, I want you to use AI here because it can be good. I don't want you to use AI here because that's not good for us, okay? Basically, that's it. Right. Time is running fast, so I'm going to have our final round of questions. I'm going to start with Professor Guilherme, then Shan, and then you're going to close with Carmen. First question for the three of you is coming from Darlene, who is asking how data science areas and AI are helping companies in innovation management. What have you seen lately? And more specifically for Sean,
directed specifically to you, which is, what is the biggest challenge when applying AI to small businesses, and how can you prepare small businesses so that they're not swallowed up by big corporates? So, de novo, então, a ordem é Professor Guilherme, depois o
again,
Sean.
Professor Guilherme, Sean, and Carmen. Very good, great questions. AI is not something from last year. It's something that has been used for decades, since being used more continuously since the 1980s. We have data from 1990s and 2000 of the use of AI in Brazilian electricity company to control blackout. If you have a failure in a substation, they would rotate the power from one using electric power using to another, one electricity power plant to another. So we have a power plant in Paraná where they need no more than 2 people for the plants to work. So AI has been used for a while, and we can see the benefit. Like in hospitals, there's a robot. We call it a robot, but it's a software AI. It's called Laura. And Laura is a project, a Brazilian project from the state of Paraná, and its goal is to reduce mortality rate, neonatal mortality rate. And the software was so good that it's now been used in CTUs for not only kids, but to reduce mortality and improve efficiency in different other treatments. So we can see AI being applied in all these years, but we are not aware of that. And in data science, we have the good thing and have the bad thing. We can use data science to provide good products for marketing. We can understand our clients' need, so we can deliver a better product. But then we have the bad part of it. We have fake news. We have all the political issues, or a company fighting the other. They use a lot of data science as a weapon. Okay, so it's nothing new, but it's important to talk about it, and that's good. The effect of a GPT chat has had in our planet. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll talk specifically to the one about small businesses and being swallowed by big corporations. And I think, the biggest concern with a lot of, small companies is, access to data. I've mentioned this, before, and sometimes that can seem daunting. You don't have all the amount of data that Google or Microsoft or these kind of companies have. However, where smaller companies do have an advantage is they're able to move quickly. Most large companies do not move fast, and so they oftentimes rely on small innovation groups within a company, or they acquire small startups who are able to make mistakes and move quickly and create and solve a problem and get a lot of followers because they're able to adapt and change and think on their feet without requiring 5 layers of executives to say yes to something before you can even start posing a problem. So that, there's pros and cons. So as a small business, you have to learn how to be smart about working either with larger companies or partnering with people who might have that data so that you can move fast.
Excelente. Então, Carmen, eu vou fazer uma maldade aqui. Você pode...
Excellent. I'm going to be I'm going to be evil here. I'm going to ask you a different question. So you can choose what question you want to answer. You can choose of the 2 questions that I've asked, but now Douglas asked Carmen, do you think that AI is beneficial for the population or not? And Roger, what are the ways can avoid AI to spread prejudice and bias, as you said before. You can pick one of them. Basic, simple questions, right? But excellent, great. Right. Bias and prejudice. It's complex. I've talked a little bit about that, so I want to talk about education. I have a channel on YouTube. Maybe you'll talk about that later there. In education, I feel like I'm a broken disc. It depends. It depends on how it was used in education. You have AI used like the TP chat. It can be used to teach a student about critical thinking to understand what kind of question they should ask, how to formulate a question, to have to come up with so that the chat can have a intelligible answer. So the student is going to have critical thinking. However, if the question, if they have to write a text and they can just copy, paste, and throw it at the GTP question and get the answer there, and nobody's going to understand that the student is not actually thinking about it. It was the chat GTP that came up with the answer. That's not going to be great. But there are tools that can help teachers with that. So in terms of plagiarism, there are tools to help you find plagiarism, but you need to think, actually we need to teach critical thinking and to students. And I think the tools are going to help us. What can we change in education to develop critical thinking and leave this model of questions and answers and just regurgitate content that you can copy paste from the computer and not fail a test. So we want the student to think about what they are learning and analyze that. So that's what I have to say. So I would like to thank you all for your time. It's always a pleasure to have you here and count on your knowledge that it go across so many field of knowledge. I also like to thank all of you who are here with us, our audience, and I'd like to invite you to participate in the next Talking Business and Global meeting. You're going to have the information soon. Thank you for your participation and see you soon.